don't recall that I was asked to speak less than 2 hours. I think one of the feelings that I have right now, maybe the main heritage that I have, is one of great pride. You have a connection to someone for so many decades, and you watch him grow. The Steiging is extremely generous and unselfish. Now, after I heard the words of the guest of honor, I'm very conflicted actually, because I was thinking of maybe changing the plan of what I had to say to something more in connection with children and parents' relationships with them. But I think I'm going to stick to my original intention. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I see your Rav, and mainly your Kehillah as well. But the way I do it is the way my Rebbe would do it, which is through a Rambam. Actually, through several Rambams. There is a Gemara in Masechet Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel, very famous Gemara, based on the pasuk that you have in the Shira that we just lay in, and that we say every day. Shira Sayam Zeh Keli Va'anveyu. The Gemara says that one of the interpretations of Anveyu is Esna'el lefanot b'mitzvahs. I will beautify myself before Hashem by the kind of mitzvahs, the quality, the expense that I have in endearing and enhancing the mitzvah and make it more precious, make it more beautiful. And the Gemara gives a number of examples. Lulav noah, tzitzis noah, Sefer Torah noah, the shirayim of the Sefer Torah, that you wrap the Sefer Torah should be beautiful, a beautiful mentor. The writing of the Sefer Torah should be beautiful, v'chola v'chola. And this Zakeli Banveyu is relating to every article, every artifact of mitzvah, that it should be as beautiful as you can afford. And that's the way you beautify yourself before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, esno'el lefanot b'mitzvahs. What's strange about it is that this very famous Gemara is never to be found in the Rambam. The Rambam never quotes that pasuk. Zeh keli va'anveyu. You find it a number of times in Chazal, a number of times in Rashi, a lot of famous Rashis, Tosfos, but you don't find it in the Rambam at all. There's some who hold that the Rambam has the idea, but it doesn't come from that pasuk. What's the idea? So the Rambam, at the end of Hilchos Isurei Mizbeach, somewhere deep in the bowels of Kochim, the Rambam has in his Sefer Avoda a section called Isurei Mizbeach, that which you're not allowed to put upon the Mizbeach. Isurei Mizbeach. And at the very end of Isurei Mizbeach, he speaks about the shemen that's appropriate for the menorah. And he tells us that certain pressings were ideal, and certain pressings were simply possible. They're Isurei Mizbeach. And those pressings are enumerated in the Mishnayos, in Menachos, and in the Gemara, and the Rambam as well. Now the Rambam tells us that the reason is because the pasuk says kosis lamoar. There's a certain level of pressings that are appropriate because they will produce the shemen zayis zoch that you need for the menorah. Then the Rambam continues and he says, as far as menachos, the meal offerings that they brought on the Mizbeach, they also had shemen. But shemen for the menachos, it doesn't matter. All the pressings are kosher. So the Rambam asks a question. After he lists the different pressings of the menachos, he says, why would we bother? Since kol ha-menachos are kosher, then why should I care which pressing I use? It's not like the menorah. So he answers to know which is the ideal, the best, the most preferred, and the average, and the inferior. Because even though even the inferior is kosher, it's not right that you should bring the inferior. He mentions in that halacha, Kahn and Hevel. Hevel hevi gamhu mi b'choretz tzonah umeichel veya. He quotes the pasuk Kol Chelev LaHashem. Chelev means the best. You know, the ideal, the most delicious, the most perfect. Each thing according to what kind of a carbon it is. So even though the menachos are all kosher, regardless of what kind of shemen you put in, which is an essential ingredient in the mincha, but nevertheless, the right way to do it is to give the best. And the Rambam then does something. He goes beyond the karbanos. After all, Kahn and Hevel, it's a carbon to Hashem. Kol Chelev LaHashem, the pasuk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and giving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rambam then says, and therefore, Kol Dover, Shehu L'Shem HaKeil HaToiv. It's interesting, he speaks about Hashem as HaKeil HaToiv. Many times the Rambam mentions HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he never uses this term. But there's a reason that he uses it. Because where is all the good that you have to give coming from? It comes from HaKeil HaToiv, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided it for you. So it's only reasonable that you should give him back the best, and you have much left behind that you can do for yourself. And then he says an amazing thing. He says, Bona Beis HaKnesses. If he built a shul, he means physically, he built a shul. Somebody wants to build a shul for the Kehillah, and he built a shul. It should be more beautiful than his own house. I remember I had a neighbor who was wealthy, and potentially he was, in fact, he became a mispalel in our shul. And at the time, before we even started making the plans for the new shul that we have, which is on East 18th and Avenue J, he was building his own house. I used to come by every day and say, beautiful, beautiful, it's marvelous. And finally, one day he came to me, he says, I appreciate that you have such a, such a generosity of spirit that you're happy that someone else is building a beautiful house. But why do you mention this almost every single day? So I said, because one of Beis HaKnesses, if he builds a shul, has to be nicer than his own house. So, Baruch Hashem, we have a Beis HaKnesses which is in fact nicer than his own house. But the Rambam then goes a step further. Hechil roev, he feeds the hungry. Yiyeh min hatoiv v'hamosik shebeshulchana. You feed the hungry, you bring him into the house, you have to give him the finest food that you have. Pisa oron. If you clothe the naked, you give somebody your coat, your jacket, shirt off of your back has to be the nicest shirt, the fanciest coat. Amazing. That halacha has two problems, so to speak, two questions that we have to ask. Number one, how did the Rambam suddenly get from the karbanos to the araman, to the poor person? Beis HaKnesses, I can see, it's a Beis Hashem. Okay, what about the poor person? Where do you see that? In Kol Chelev LaHashem. Second question is, why isn't this halacha in Hilchos Tzedakah? The Rambam has Hilchos Tzedakah in a different place. Hilchos Matnos Aniyim. In Sefer Zroyim. This is in Sefer Avodah. This halacha should belong, should tell us this, that in Hilchos Matnos Aniyim, in Hilchos Tzedakah, when an ani comes to your door, you have to feed him the very best. The answer is it doesn't belong in Hilchos Tzedakah at all, because it's not a din tzedakah. As far as the ani is concerned, if you fill his stomach, that's just fine. And if you fill it with potatoes, that's fine too. He's no longer hungry, He's no longer desperate. He's no longer afraid that he's going to die. If you put him on a coat, and it's winter, and it's cold, you put him on a nice, very, very inexpensive, but capable coat. You don't have to buy him an alpaca. You don't have to buy him a fur coat. You don't have to buy him something that in any case, probably 3 months later, will be a shmata. Why do you have to give the best? But before we explain that, there's one thing that I have to tell you, and that is that anyone who suggests that that is a substitute for the Zek Keli Va'anveyu is making a terrible mistake. He's wrong. There are Svarim that say that, so I'm going out on a limb. But he's wrong, and I'll tell you why he's wrong. And this is the secret, and I think the secret of your HaRav, as I'll get to it in a minute. Zek Keli Va'anveyu reminds me that every Erev Sukkot, and I mean literally Erev Sukkot, usually an hour before the Yontif, my Einiklach are there, they're driving me crazy to put on their decorations. And it's a hectic moment for everyone, and certainly for HaRav. And he comes in, knocks on the door, comes inside, and he shows me his lulav and esrog. I want to know if this is kosher. The lulav and esrog cost him no less than $500, without a doubt. And what he really wants is for me to say that he has the most beautiful lulav and esrog in the entire community, which he will then be able to say that the Rav told me that he's never seen a lulav or esrog like this in his entire life. There's no question about it that that's what it's all about. And every year he comes at the same time with the same question: is this kosher? What's my point? Every single one of the examples in the Gemara in Shabbos, Zek Keli Va'anveyu, is something that you keep. It's yours. Your tefillin, your lulav, your esrog, your sukkah, it's all yours. And the reason that that's not this Rambam is because if you look at the examples that the Rambam gave, nothing remains with you in the entire list in Isurim Mizbeach. It's always giving away. And then we look at the Rambam's language and we realize why an ani is the same. Because he writes, Kol dover shu l'shem ha'kel ha'toiv. L'shem ha'kel ha'toiv is not Zakeli Va'anveyu. Va'anveyu is esno'el l'fon of mitzvahs. I will become beautiful in the mitzvahs. All right, that's a tremendous madrega. You can spend your money on a lot of things. You can buy jewelry for yourself. You can buy all kinds of goodies, all kinds of nice things. You can buy a fancy car. You can do all kinds of things with your money. And that's also for you. But do things that are mitzvahs for you is a madrega. But it's not the Isurim Mizbeach. It's not the menachos. Because the menachos you put on the Mizbeach, it goes away from you. You don't have it anymore. The Rambam is telling us that when you give an ani tzedakah, you're giving away. When you're giving away, that means you're giving for Hashem. And when you're giving for Hashem, you have to give the best. And that's not halacha in tzedakah. It's halacha in kol chaylev Hashem. There are all kinds of rabbanim. All kinds. All kinds of rabbanim. And every Rav is always making a decision when he becomes a Rav and for the rest of his life. And that decision is a matter of choosing how to use your time, what to do, how to care, and how do you manage your life in the context of everyone else's life. And there is one kind of a Rav. I have to tell you that the turn of the century was probably because they gave up hope. They were overwhelmed by the tremendous disintegration of the cloud of the tzibur and the complete deviation from Shmiras HaMitzvahs, so they retreated into a shell. And what did they do a whole day? They sat and they learned a whole day. They wrote svarim, beautiful svarim. And meanwhile, the communities were disintegrating under their feet. I don't know what would have happened if these people were Moser Nefesh and went out into the street and just fought and fought and fought and fought. Some did, a few did. And some people were shattered. Even with the Gea Kashrus, everybody knows that the one and only Rav HaRashi of New York City, Rav Yankov Yosef, was a Goyin Otzum. He came here to become the Rav HaRashi. He had great ideas and great plans. He was destroyed by the Kashrus unions, destroyed literally. The one thing that they did for him was they gave him a tremendous levaya. It was an unbelievably famous levaya. The whole city came out for him. A person has to ask himself, what is my achrayus? And when he asks himself that question splits into two. What is my achrayus in terms of my own learning, in terms of my own growth, in terms of my own avodas Hashem? And usually, the answer to that question, if you're honest with yourself, is, I don't know Shas yet Ba'al Peh, I haven't learned Yerushalmi, I haven't mastered all the halachas of the Shulchan Aruch. Many, many miles to go before I sleep. Nevertheless, I have to do as much as I can, so I don't have a spare minute. Chesed is with your family. It's a tremendous amount that you have to do in your own Dalet Amos. A person gives himself to a tzibur. That is an ultimate question, not in Zekeli Van Vei. That is a question in Hilchos Yisurim Mizbeach of Kol Chayla Hashem. In the same way that a person can give an ani, he can also give an oshir, because every oshir can be an ani in something or other. Sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's a loan, sometimes securing a loan by using the force of your authority, sometimes it's getting people to learn more. That's a tremendous avodah to get people to learn. It's a tremendous avodah. You have to keep pushing and pushing. And after a point, the person says, maybe it's too much, or it's very uncomfortable. I love these people. So I should keep pushing. Every Rav has that question. Every Rav has the question, how much I'm dealing with people now, I'm already a zoken. I'm dealing with people now, people come to you because you're a zoken. That's what happens. So I'm dealing with people who are literally eating me up. They eat me up to such an extent that I start learning seriously. I'm not kidding. Between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. This is because I've committed myself personally to that involvement with people. I don't know if that's a requirement of every Rav, but it happened. It so happened. But you have a Rav, and I know from the very outset, his commitment to the Kehillah. How do I know? Because he tells me. He talks about it. We discuss these things. His commitment to the Kehillah is sacrosanct. It's paramount. It's number one achrayus. And everything else has to take a back seat to that commitment. That's extraordinary. That's really extraordinary. And it reflects itself in everything. Because sometimes it's a shidduch, and sometimes it's advice, and sometimes it's this, and sometimes it's that. And more than anything, it's much easier for a Rav to default into the status quo. It's so easy. It's much easier to feed you chomot and kugel and say you're wonderful and you're perfect the way you are, which is a mahalach. And sometimes with that mahalach, maybe people get better on their own. Most of the time, they default to what is easiest for them. And then they come to a shul and they enjoy the shul. They enjoy being there, they enjoy the shul, the kugel and the chomot for sure. But they also enjoy talking to one another during davening, tzaddikim amongst them, ben gavra legavra, but they're really not into the davening. They're into the camaraderie, they're into the gesellschaft, they're into the socialization that the shul provides. You know, Chazal tell us that Beis HaKnesses, cursed are the people who call the Beis HaKnesses Beis Am. You know, Beis Am and Beis HaKnesses are almost exactly the same thing. What do you think Beis HaKnesses is? Knesses gathering and Am is a people. What's the difference? There are a lot of Reformed temples that decided to call themselves Beis Am. I don't know if they did that. That's probably the only Gemara that they ever learned. But they call themselves Beis Am. The Gemara says, cursed are those people who call their Kehillah Beis Am. Because Beis Am means it's there for socialization. Knesses means you're merging and molding into one entity. And that one entity is through Torah and through Tefillah, nothing else. Rav Soloveitch used to speak about a shul that it's, in a certain sense, the loneliest place because you're all alone with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He didn't believe the family that sits together, prays together, stays together. He didn't believe in that. You are with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The point is that a Rav who has to push these values and resist, I don't know how the Olam is, and maybe I'm taking a risk. In my shul, I do not allow anyone to look at his cell phone in the main base medrash. You have a cell phone, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, there's only a couple of people learning there. You cannot look at your phone. You have to go out of the base medrash, you go to the hallway, you don't have to leave the building. You go to the second floor, the third floor, the basement, wherever you want. But you cannot use it in the basement. Baruch Hashem, I have the kind of appeal. I was actually surprised myself that they took it rather calmly. I was impressed. But the point is that why do I have to bother with that? Because I care, mamish mikerev leiv nefesh, with a mesirus nefesh, that the place has to be a makom kodesh. Tachlis. The Rav cares. This Rav that you have cares. He cares about every single one of you, man, woman, and child. Every single one who's in Teifis-based medrash. And he wants you to grow, and he wants you to steig, and he wants you to accomplish. And he wants you to be a bigger Eved Hashem. As you heard the words. What does it mean, Kabbalah's Oil Malchus Shamayim? You know, I have a taina against Art Scroll and all the translations in the world. It's not just Art Scroll. They should have had the guts to translate Eved as a slave. Eved Hashem is not the servant of God. A servant is a servant and a slave is a slave. You can't use the word slave today. It's a bad word. You can't use a slave of God. Wow, that's too overwhelming. That's too harsh. We have Bechira. What do you mean slave? A slave has Bechira. He can say no. What's going to happen to him if he says no? He'll get beaten. He may die. Well, it's the same thing in the Torah. The Rebbeinu Shalom tells us you're not allowed to do this. And what happens if you do? Well, Mois Yumas. Well, we don't have that anymore. There's no Mois Yumas. So we've gotten used to that. You're a servant. It's very nice. I'm a servant. I have to be a slave. Yeah, I do have to be a slave. Well, don't get a Rav to tell you that you have to be slaves of Hashem. But if you do it in the right way, with tremendous love, you can get it across in a way that people can actually accept it. Because the most free person in this universe is a person who's truly a slave of Hashem. There's no one else that's more free. You have that kind of a love. You have a person who really cares that you should be the best Eved Hashem that you can be. We'll stick to the Hebrew word. You can be the best Eved Hashem that you could possibly be. And that's an agenda that is not, what does he get from it? Well, he gets a beautiful kehillah. He gets a kehillah that cares about HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his mitzvahs. He gets a kehillah that's serious. That's a tremendous thing for a Rav to have. That's true. He's not doing that for himself. And there's a tremendous amount of Mesiras Nefesh. B'yodim u'b'loyod. So I just want to give my own personal birchas kohen. Can a kohen give a bracha to a kohen? Interesting question. Because the pasuk says, "V'ani avarachem." Hashem gives the bracha to the kohen. But just the same, when I hear about the Kehillah from the Rav, I hear the love. I hear the love. Shamaya Tishmu. What resonates? What do you hear? I hear the love. I hear the care. I hear the compassion. I hear the worry. I hear everything that could possibly be in a great Rav. How he is concerned in that idea of the Yisurim Mizbeach Rambam of Kol Chayil Hashem, Kol Dovu Shul Hashem of Keil HaToyv. He does it for the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the Melave does it for you. So I'm very, very thrilled that I was able to come. Anyone who wants to hear what I have to say about children and parents, you'll have to invite me again. Should be Zoycha Taka to the Gula Shleima. It's very wonderful to be here. And I wish you all tremendous hatzlocha. I give the whole Kehillah bracha. The Bar Yiskufa and HaRav Ma'alya should keep steiging to reach the highest levels that you could possibly reach. To be the freest people that you could possibly become.
Kula Shlema b'mehela b'yameinu amen.
Amen.